Welcome back to A Little Faith. I'm Levi. I'm here with John Pople. Hi, John.
Hi,
How you doing?
I'm doing real well, thanks,
Yeah,
Levi.
yeah. We're here in Capitola, California, which is where you live. I'm excited. We're talking about your Faith Talk that you recorded for us. So I can speak freely without confusing anyone with context. Today it is February 13th. We recorded your Faith Talk in October, so we're going to talk about that. Kind of look back to that date. And it has not been released yet. It's going to come out in the next day or two. So,
Fantastic.
So that's when now we can get our timeline right. And then your talk is called "An Intended Universe."
That's correct.
I always get uncomfortable starting this conversation because I am just not a science brain, right?
That's fine.
It's never something that has affected my faith. It's kind of a
Sure.
maybe it should more. I don't know. Like I'm kind of but I'm kind of like, well, I'm here, and I guess I have other challenges. My faith challenges are different, But I
Sure,
think for a lot of
sure.
people, there is a question that needs to be answered, about how the earth was created,
Right. Right.
and how that aligns with the biblical record and all that. What we kind of gave you an option to offer a topic, right? And
Yes.
what drew you here?
I guess it wasn't me. I mean, you can imagine, I'm sure, if you're a scientist and also very heavily involved in a religion or
Right.
a minister legally, then people are always going to ask me, hey, how do you resolve that?
Oh, okay.
Which is,
Yeah.
and to me, that's kind of a fascinating question. The reason it's a fascinating question is because there must be a default assumption that that's a conflict. Right?
Yes.
People they're not going to ask you the question, how do you resolve that?
Right.
Unless they automatically assume those two things must be in conflict with each other.
Right.
So I mean, and I don't think they are, and I think it's demonstrable that they're not. It's not like I'm trying to support the Dodgers and the Giants here, right?
Right. Yeah.
Boo Dodgers.
Yeah, I was gonna say.
Sorry.
There is one opinion or the other. Your point is that's a black or white kind of thing. Usually, I guess sports is not a perfect analogy, but why is this not that? Right?
Why
That's
is it
kind of
not?
what you're saying. Like
That's right.
that's what you're saying.
That's right. And so, for example, historically, there's still a perception that this is a fight.
Yeah.
And if you're going to ask someone in the street, hey, okay, then why do you think it's a fight? Where does this historically come from? Often they'll mention the big punch-up that happened between Galileo and what was then the Roman Catholic Church. And this is science versus religion. It dates back to that, if not before. And for sure, Galileo and the Roman Catholic Church had an enormous punch-up. And Galileo being the individual lost.
Right.
But that was nothing to do with an argument of science and religion. And I'd like to speak to that for a
Sure. Yeah. Go for it.
second
That'd be
if I
great.
can.
Yeah.
Because Galileo, first of all, strongly believed in God.
Right.
So right away, you can't put him on one side of that divide, because for him, that was never divided.
Right. Okay.
His lovely quote, and I do enjoy this quote, and you may have heard it because it's reasonably well known, is, "The laws of nature were written by the hand of God in the language of mathematics."
Interesting. That is a great quote. Yeah.
It's lovely. I mean, you might not agree with it, but
Right.
that's what he said. So right away, he's pro God,
Right.
pro theism at least, right? And the Roman Catholic Church at that time were pro science.
Yeah.
So how did the conflict come about? And there's a lesson back then that could still be relevant today, and I feel it is. What the church wouldn't do is accept that any knowledge needed to be updated.
Okay.
They, quotes, had the truth.
Right. Okay.
So they were pro-science,
Right.
and the science that they had was from Aristotle way back before Galileo.
Sure. Yeah.
And so all Galileo had done was to come along and say, hey, I've looked into Aristotelian science.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of problems. There's a lot of mistakes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Here's the stuff that's new and good and better. And that's what the fight was about.
Interesting. And updating your information. That is interesting.
Updating it. So can
Right.
the church learn to update information?
Right.
I believe in absolute truth. I believe in an absolute universe.
Right.
But I'm convinced that any human understanding of the absolute universe is in need of constant update.
Right. Yeah. That is interesting. That so you're saying that to repeat back that that Galileo Roman Catholic Church fallout is kind of the people point to that as, oh, that's the first battle between. But you said
Correct.
it exactly. I think it can be frustrating. People say, well, I don't believe in God. I believe in science. It's like, well, or I subscribe to science. They wouldn't use the word belief, right? But
Correct.
that is not a conflict, or it shouldn't be. It becomes a conflict when someone says, no, everything is, there was no designer, which is again what you argued so well in the video.
That was what I tried to do. So,
Yeah. Was there anything else that you wanted to include in the video that you didn't get to? I mean, because that Galileo thing would have been great. Actually,
that was part of an earlier script, and I realized it was just too long.
Yeah.
Perhaps one other thing I would throw in is a lot of my talk, in a way, unfortunately, was based on statistics.
Right.
But that's where the argument is won and lost for me.
Yeah.
And some enormous numbers. There's a chance of 1/10 to the 40 that this is wrong or whatever, etc. And people will still say to me, yeah, but it could still happen.
There's still that it could still happen.
And that's true, of course. But then I look, and we can look in the normal world, and we're not talking about science here, we're not talking about religion, definitely.
Yeah.
But if you look at a jury, some of the most powerful evidence we have now is DNA evidence, matching a person's trace, body,
blood, sweat, whatever,
exactly, found at a scene. And I remember there was a case not so long ago, a couple of months ago, and there was DNA was presented in trying to say, look, this gentleman was here at the scene and is guilty of this event. And the DNA, and these numbers were large even by DNA standards. So there's only a 1 in 85 billion chance, and that's a large number even for DNA matching.
Yeah.
There's only a 1 in 85 billion chance that this guy is not responsible, was not here.
You just said large number, but I think you meant that in the reverse, right? Like 1 in 85 billion is a small number.
Right.
That's actually for DNA standards a large probability.
Correct.
Right.
Correct.
That's interesting.
So when you say large, it was 1 in 85 billion. It makes it a very small chance,
right,
or a very large number that's against it.
Yeah. Okay. Got it.
So, and these 12 jurors that were sitting on this case went away for a relatively short period of time and came back and returned a verdict that said, look, we're going with the 85 billion, not the one. And they probably all felt confident about that. And I'm like, I could have been one of them. And I would feel equally confident with their verdict.
Correct, yeah.
And then I say, well, okay, now the probability of an undesigned universe doesn't have, 85 billion is basically a 9 with 10 zeros after it.
Right.
The chances of an undesigned universe is something with 40 zeros after it.
Right.
Why are you turning around and telling me that but it could?
Right. You
went to bed to sleep that night.
Yep.
With a clear conscience because you said 10 zeros are enough.
Right.
And I agree with you.
Yeah. Right. Interesting. I've had this conversation before that when you get to that many zeros, it becomes philosophical in some ways, or logic arguments, and what bothers me with that is when you're in a debate, let's say science versus religion. Well, which side gets infinity, right? The idea that infinity exists, right? Because if the religion argument's going to take infinity, well then I have God, who is infinite in many ways, right? If the science side gets infinity, right? Well, then I have the one that I need because I can apply infinity to whatever number that you're making out, or that you're arriving at, right? And that gets down to where it becomes kind of a faith crunch. No matter what, at some point you have to make a faithful decision. I believe at some point.
I hear you.
Because you decide where's your infinity in, I guess.
I guess that's an interesting. I'd never thought of it that way actually. But I guess what I'd say even then is I'd happily concede infinity to someone saying, I subscribe to science, as do I, but not religion. And that's okay, fine. So what's the probability that God exists?
Okay.
Boom, you've got infinity, therefore he exists. It turns out that actually infinity is generally philosophically very unhelpful.
Okay, yeah, there you go. Well, that's very interesting, yeah. But yeah, like you said, we should keep repeating because I don't want it to be confused that it should never be a debate of science versus God. But you're saying that's why it really is no God versus God. Right, there was no designer versus the designer.
Right,
that would be the two sides that we're arguing.
Yes.
Because when you lose, I think we do lose when we give up on all science. That's for sure. And I've seen that. You've seen that on internet message boards. Well, then if you give up on science, then don't go to the hospital, or whatever, or don't wash your hands, or whatever. Well, I guess I use a bad example because a Bible student would say that the Bible does say to wash your hands.
Well, don't type on your keyboard. Why do you believe this is being posted? Only science is, don't. That would be a great solution.
Yeah. So, anyways, that's a important thing to repeat. Is there any other things that you would have mentioned? I guess that you left on the cutting room floor.
Sure. I've only got one more, but I think it's quite a valuable one. Let's be clear. The fact is, evolution, as in an undesigned universe, it sells. It's selling right now.
Okay.
Why is it selling? I don't know. I don't understand everyone's psyche, and I barely understand mine. One of the proponents is Richard Dawkins, who's a very kind of intense campaigner for that idea, and he's written a book called The Blind Watchmaker.
Uh-huh.
And my one comment that I want to make is that that's the wrong label for what he's selling.
Okay.
I think he's being very cunning, but the idea that evolution is a blind watchmaker is fundamentally untrue.
Okay.
Let me explain what I mean by that. And I'm going to need your help here, Levi.
Okay.
Do you believe that, on the spot, do you believe that a blind man could make a watch?
Yes.
So do I. Okay. So the moment you say, I'm selling you a blind watchmaker,
Oh, I see.
you're like,
Okay, I'll take it.
the concept is like, okay, that would work. That would
Right,
work.
right,
And so
right.
if Dawkins is selling a blind watchmaker, no wonder the concept sells, because I believe, I'm sure there is one. I have done no internet research, right?
Yeah,
but I'm
yeah.
sure there has been
A
blind
blind
watchmakers.
watchmaker, yeah.
But what is the watchmaker? And I identify 5 points. The watchmaker intends to make a watch.
Uh-huh.
The watchmaker has the knowledge of how to make a watch.
Okay.
The watchmaker seeks out materials, metals or glass or whatever, to make that watch.
Right.
The watchmaker processes those materials so that they can become a watch.
Yeah.
And he applies his skills to that end. That's
Right.
a watchmaker.
Right.
Now let's make him blind. Okay.
Okay.
All 5 points are still the same.
Interesting.
He still wants to.
Yeah.
He still knows how to.
Uh-huh.
He still gets the materials. He still processes them. And his skill to process those materials is compromised by his blindness.
Right.
A little bit.
Right.
But you still believe a blind person can make a watch. So do
Right.
I.
Right.
That is not what undesigned evolution is.
Okay.
Because undesigned evolution does not intend to make a watch. Doesn't know what a watch is. Doesn't want to make a watch.
Right.
Does not collect materials. Does
I
not
see.
process materials to that
Right.
end.
Right.
And has no skills to do it.
Right.
So what Dawkins should have sold on the cover of his book or whatever
Yeah.
is, and I don't mean this in a judgmental way, an insane person,
Okay.
right? Someone who's lost contact with
Right,
all
right,
reality,
right.
is unable to think,
Yeah.
or thinks in a disconnected way.
Uh-huh.
The insane man with no intention or ability to make a watch, do you believe that person would make a watch?
No.
Nor
Yeah.
do I.
Right.
And that's why the whole concept of the blind
I
watchmaker
see.
is untruthful.
I see. Yeah. Just the labeling of that.
The
Yeah.
labeling is so wrong.
Right.
It sells because the label sells,
Yeah. Yeah.
but it's not it's not the substance. The label's on the wrong thing.
Right. Right.
And that's if I had more time, I would probably throw that
Throw that
argument
one in.
as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
yeah.
because it's negative,
Yeah.
I take it out. I like to give a more positive message.
No, I agree. I think the talk that you gave is a very positive. This is why I this is why I got this.
Right.
Yeah, this is why I got here. I think many would be quick to say that there is the other attraction, why it sells. And when you said that, why it sells, I said, oh, interesting. He's going to go here. Well, when there is no God, it releases any moral responsibility, or a lot of moral responsibility.
Right.
So that might be why someone wants that. They want to believe that.
Right.
Right. They choose that because they're feeling guilt. What breaks my heart about that why that sells so well is because to me that is another just misrepresentation of what Jesus was about and what religion is about.
Right.
Right? Like it is not we kind of got hurt by I think religion and then how man-made religions have acted for the last 2,000 years also
Right,
hurts.
exactly.
But there's this idea that it's religion today is still the 10 Commandments, right? Thou shalt not do this or that or that. Right, and so a young person or a kid or an adult at some point becomes this realization that I don't want to be bound by these rules.
Right.
Sure. When I think a true understanding of religion, right, and a designer in his plan in the Son, as we have contained in the Bible, is to love people, right, and to be working your hardest on showing those fruits of the Spirit, right, to be accepted into following the Spirit.
Yeah, it's
right?
a growth thing. It's not a restriction.
It's a
thing.
growth thing, right?
Right.
Exactly. And
But it's been presented and packaged as a restriction
It's been-
thing.
yes.
And people
It's-
don't want to be restricted.
It's very frustrating because I think once you are aligned, once you have become aligned with God in a way, and seen the example of Jesus, right, to live like Him. Well, I'm motivated to not do those things. I think that's the other. This is now purely my opinion, but I think all
Sure.
sin is selfishness, right? And all these things that you're being told not to do are generally at their very base very selfish acts.
Right.
Right, and you're not helping anybody by killing them as an extreme example, right?
Right.
Usually not always not helping them. It's self versus selfless. It's animal versus spiritual, and to be concerned to when you're someone who's I want to be morally free and not be told to not do whatever I want. It's like, well, that is your exact problem. Is you are pursuing yourself. You're following your belly, right? You know,
Right.
or whatever. You know,
Right.
instead of following the will and purpose of God. So it's a that's again to me why it's when well. Yeah, I don't believe in God because you don't want to have this scary father figure giving you rules, which I don't believe to be the.
At the same time, as the religious institutions crumble, as they have crumbled, this threatening, oppressive form of religion is going away. And I think this may provide an encouraging future where people are prepared to say, I am actually spiritual, and therefore I really do believe there could be some sort of coordinating power here.
Yeah.
And because it's no longer presented in a drastic and draconian manner,
Right.
that may be cause for hope for the future.
Yeah, that is interesting. Yeah, no, I think there's a. I mean, this is again. We could probably press stop record and press start record on that whole concept, because I've taken this another direction. But so I'll pin it back to a reason that science, quote unquote, the argument for science, right, versus the argument for God sells in one way is I think it's a misunderstanding of what we're asking you to do by believing in God.
Sure.
Right. We're not asking. There's I say these things and I immediately think of the mini verses about God wanting obedience, and those things are true. But I think that all stems from a love, right, that you're feeling from God and Jesus.
Very true. Although I don't want to go too far down that road, Levi. I'll tell you why. Because the way it's packaged in the circles in which I move is like, do you believe in an evidence-based, fact-based system, or are you just throwing yourself out on a feeling? Now, I'm not throwing myself out on a feeling, right? I'm contending that evidence-based will give you science and God, right? It'll give you those two. What you do with your feelings is up to you, right? I have very few. I'm British, so that's fine. I'm immune. But so it's not as if that's the way it's sold. Science is the evidence-based, and religion is the kind of like funny feeling-based.
Yeah.
And I understand why people choose facts over feelings. That's not the difference either.
Okay.
Looking at the facts, again, between the electromagnetic force and the strong nuclear force and that kind of stuff, looking at the facts gives you science and God. That was my ultimate contention.
That's what you're saying.
And ironically, I think Galileo, although with less facts than I have, not through my brilliance, partly through his, would agree with me.
Okay. Yeah, powerful. And to that end, though, when you talk about a pursuit of facts, and versus feelings, and again, I hate getting into this. I honestly, I can say it. I hate getting into this being so under educated as I am in this specific issue.
No,
I also mean like in what is popular opinion in our community. Like,
right.
What am I about to say that's going to make someone very offended? I have no idea.
I'm sure you'll manage it.
Yeah, because we see lots of, especially on social media and email chains and in talks that people are giving, is there's a lot of concern about a belief in our community of yes, an intended design, but one that worked out over millions of years, right? Resulting in the same evidence that someone who quote unquote believes in science would use for the Big Bang, right? And forfeiting essentially, and here's where I get back to facts versus feelings, forfeiting a literal understanding of Genesis 1.
Right.
What do you think about that? Like, and was there you're clearly intentional in avoiding any of that wording?
Sure.
Any of those specific kind of argumentative wordings in our video?
No, I see it very much as a sort of a hurdle number 2.
Okay.
And I think hurdle number 1 is so important that science gives you God. That you've got 15 minutes. Get over hurdle number 1. Don't clatter into hurdle number 2 and knock it down.
And hurdle number 2 is how God delivered the earth, essentially.
And many other questions that come in at that point.
Okay.
I don't mind. It's funny you started this conversation by saying, science was never my crutch that I needed to walk. I was able to walk, maybe I need 12 other crutches, but I didn't need that one. And in a way, this second question is a crutch I never needed. It's like, I don't mind how. I need you to understand that an evidence-based system will suggest a designer.
Yes.
If you get that, I'm cool with the rest.
Right.
I might have my take beyond that. You might have your take beyond that. I'm not too worried.
Right.
I'm not too worried. Interestingly, my main thought about Genesis 1 is it's describing how a disciple should develop, not the physical universe.
Right.
It's actually just describing the development of a disciple, and that's a big thing for me. I present that in talks. I hope to in the future as well.
Yeah. Talk more about that. Why is it interesting? Excuse me. You presented in talks. You've already presented in talks. You've developed those, and that's your study in John, right?
In a way, yes.
Right.
I mean, it's light, water, bread. First, you have illumination.
Right.
Then you have a raising up above through water. Then you have nourishment. These are the contents. And then day 4. Funny you should mention day 4. Was like, now the funny thing is, man was designed to rule everything, but not the stars. Sun, moon, and stars ruled him. They shall rule your day, and they shall rule your night. Which translates to saying that illumination you had, that's not just a fun piece of fact to hold in your head. That needs to rule your day and night.
Oh, wow. Interesting.
And that now becomes really important on a discipleship level.
Yeah.
Not on a was the universe made level.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think, yeah. So you're essentially, to summarize, you could argue, I'm not going to say you are, or
Sure.
it could be argued that Genesis 1 is has a very, very strong and necessary spiritual use and application, and that
Absolutely.
is, and in the 7 days and in the organization of the 7 and how that's aligned.
Yeah,
it
I
is
personally insist on that.
correct, right.
Because the style of the presentation of Scripture, and therefore, if it's describing God's work, tends to be first literal, then spiritual.
Right.
It's probable that there's a literality to that as well. But that's not the thing to insist upon.
What is, and that is God. What God did design
Yes.
the creation, right? It is very intended. It was planned,
Yes.
and has and then now you go from there. Because yeah, it's the beginning. I was just talking about this recently with someone else as well. Is the first religious question is how did we get here? What are we doing here?
Of course.
That's the first. That's the beginning, right? And then once you answer, oh, it was God. Well, then now I have to. Then did he leave a book? Because now I have to compare, what everyone says is a spiritual text, or whatever, and then go from there.
Yeah, it crops up just one more time in a useful way. And I have nothing more to say beyond this, but I'll say this much. And again, I'm going to put you on the spot just for fun.
Yeah.
So and it's about faith. This is where we wrapped up. It's the faith talk. So there's a chapter in the Bible, as you know, which is all about faith and the faithful men of old, the 11th chapter of the letter to Hebrews.
Right.
And it's a category of all these men and women who did these amazing things because they're like, no, I trust, and I will therefore do this thing, and they are being commended by there. Right? Now, who's at the top of the list? Verse 4, it says, by faith Abel. And there's a sort of a pseudo-chronological trend here.
Yeah.
So whilst Adam isn't mentioned, his son Abel is, and blah, blah, blah.
Okay.
And for years I'd have told you Abel, verse 4, that's the first one mentioned. And it actually isn't. In verse 3 it says, by faith we.
Oh, interesting.
You and me get promoted, potentially, to the top of the list. If you've done what it's done in verse 3. If you've done verse 3, then you're the we that's mentioned.
Okay.
And it says, by faith, and I'm going to have to paraphrase, we don't have Bibles in front of us. By faith we took a look at this universe and said, it wasn't created by itself.
Interesting.
Thinking, what an astonishing result.
Yeah.
After all that I've researched and done and said, the faith chapter says, top of the list,
Yeah.
before Moses, before Abraham, before Abel,
Yeah.
by faith, we looked out and said, this didn't make itself.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
Beautiful.
There's the verse Ecclesiastes, we're born with eternity in our hearts.
Right.
And that to me is, and many others, that you feel that twinge as everybody does, and then finds an answer. Right? They find an answer, and we all hope that answer is an intended universe. Well, thanks, John. Thank you very much for giving the talk
Sure
and
thing, Levi.
taking this time now
Absolutely.
on a little faith.
Hello, this is Tom from the Platform, a Christadelphian podcast that tackles challenging topics and how we talk about them. Our aim is to bring self-awareness to the debate in the Christadelphian community and instill good conversation through listening techniques. You can find us on all good podcasting platforms, and we are proudly supported by the WCF. We look forward to you joining the conversation. If you have any comments or questions, you can find us on Twitter and Facebook.